Hi everyone, it's good to have you. This is Phaedra. I'm the artist and astrologer behind Mystick, Physick. I wanted to just do hopefully a shorter live stream than the normal new moon and full moon live streams that I host to talk a little bit about the current Pluto retrograde transit. So Pluto just went retrograde in Sagittarius, and I noticed that a lot of people kind of felt that. And it wasn't something I had planned on talking about, but I brought it up in my notes for the new moon live stream that we just had a couple days ago. And the material that I put together on it for you turned out to be a bit of material, and it would have made the new moon intention setting live stream run a little bit too long, and so I decided to split it off into a separate live stream. And so hopefully this will only run, 20 minutes or half an hour or so. It's not necessarily like a huge involved, like our intention setting ones are, where we are doing visualization and writing down our intentions and working with that sort of thing. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what to expect, what this means, what to expect, and how you can use it. So Pluto is currently transiting through the sidereal sign of Sagittarius. This is a 5-month-long retrograde. He does this retrograde usually about once a year. And so this is kind of an annual event. So it's something that you can kind of prepare for, and you can think ahead to and anticipate and plan for how you want to use this energy. It's very transformative energy. I love Pluto transits in one sense. They can be really traumatic sometimes. So something you have to be careful about, but I like the fact that it represents transformation and metamorphosis. So that, when you're you have an area of your life where you do feel like you're ready for that kind of change, if you can leverage the energy of Pluto to kind of give it a push, that sometimes can be super beneficial. Sometimes can be super crazy and stressful too. So it just kind of depends on how you experience it and how you choose to use it, whether you're reacting or responding to the energy. So Pluto, sometimes you hear astrologers talk about Pluto being a generational planet. And what that means is that his effect is broad in the sense of he touches everyone's life in a transit. So he's one of the slower moving planets. It takes Pluto about 248 years to circle, to make a complete circle of the zodiac of the solar system, right, in his orbit around the sun. And so on average, so if you divide that out by 12 signs, that's about 20 years in each sign. So that's what we mean by generational. It takes him a long time to transit each sign. And so his effect in a given sign is going to impact everyone born within an entire generation. And so that's kind of what we mean. Now, of course, all the planets have the periods of direct motion, periods of retrograde motion. And so what that can mean is that it can take him anywhere between 14 to 30 years to transit a sign. So a little shorter in some signs and a little bit longer in some signs. So in terms of Pluto transits, and especially Pluto retrogrades, let's talk first about who's most affected. Because this is going to affect everybody differently in a different area of life, and it's going to affect everybody to a different degree. Some people might feel this really strongly, some people might not hardly feel it at all. You can always use it regardless of how much you're going to feel it in your personal life. So Pluto ruled signs, Scorpio Sun and Scorpio Rising, are going to feel this probably most strongly, and people who also have Pluto as a chart ruler. And I know that we haven't talked about chart rulers yet. I do plan on doing like a separate video where we can talk about chart rulers, and I'll walk you through how you can find out what your chart ruler is. But people who have Pluto present really strongly in their chart, and I'm one of those, so that we tend to feel this more. And so if you are one of those people who has Scorpio Sun, Scorpio Rising, or Pluto as your chart ruler, you might feel this much more strongly than other folks, which means you're probably going to be feeling tired and run down, and it could be any reason, any explanation for why you're feeling tired or run down, but probably something's going on for you, especially just as he enters the retrograde, and probably again when he comes out of the retrograde at the end of September, where you're going to feel tired, you're going to feel run down. Now Pluto, he rules regeneration, and especially regeneration of the physical body. And so all of us are going to feel that slow down over the next 5 months. So be sure and take care of your physical body. So that's one thing that you want to pay attention to. Make sure that you get the right nutrition, get adequate rest over the next 5 months. Really kind of take care of yourself and see if you can't help consciously pick up some of the slack to make up for the lack of support from Pluto in that sense. So what does Pluto represent besides transformation and metamorphosis and regeneration? Well, he represents wealth, right? Scorpio is the natural ruler of the 8th house, which is about wealth through other people's resources, right? He also rules influence and authority, which are things that we all deal with in our lives, whether because we wield them or because they're wielded over us in one way or another. But he also rules control and obsession, in addition to transformation and metamorphosis. And so those are some of the themes that you could see activated during the retrograde, though. Those themes are generally turned inward. When a planet is in retrograde motion, and especially when we see it in the natal chart, that typically means for us that the energy that planet typically expresses, instead of being expressed out into the world, it's turned inward. So it's internalized, or it can also be just weaker in general than normal. It can be more unpredictable in retrograde. It can mean something's changing kind of or in flux in terms of that type of energy. And it can also just mean that everything moves slower. So any Pluto ruled activity is probably going to take considerably more time to make progress in over the next 5 months transit. And then once we move out, you'll probably see those types of projects really start to take off. Hi Dita, glad to have you with us. So getting back to Pluto being generational, so he affects large groups of people over long periods of time in much the same way, because he's spending the same time in that sign. Now, where we will each feel a personal difference in how Pluto influences our lives and even our own like personality through his placement in the natal chart, where we're going to find the most personal difference is by what house he's in when we're born. And that of course is going to be determined by what time we were born, right? What sign is our rising sign. That's going to influence what house Sagittarius landed in at the moment that we're born. And so what I have noticed over time, especially around the retrogrades themselves, the retrograde and direct activity, is that sometimes you might feel this retrograde happen in the same house that he's in your natal chart. So for instance, to kind of give you an example, I have him natally in my 4th house. So Pluto would rule my 4th house of home and family and real estate. And so like right now, what I'm noticing as the retrograde begins is I'm seeing a lot of transformation and change in my own home. Not so much necessarily in my family or the family dynamic, but in terms of like rearranged rooms, rearranged furniture. We're doing some kinds of renovation that require, a degree of destruction and having to, put new things in place and put new things together in the house. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing, is I'm seeing a lot of what you could say transformative activity turned inward to my own home. And so that's how I'm kind of seeing it play out so far. Now Sagittarius, for instance, in my chart, that's a different part. I have that on my 7th house of partnerships, so marriage and business partnerships. And so there's a potential that I could see the Pluto retrograde impact my relationships in that sense between now and the end of September. So those are kind of the 2 ways that you want to keep an eye out for potential influence on this retrograde, is what house is Pluto in your natal chart, and then also what house is Sagittarius in your natal chart. And so those will be 2 areas that you can look to. Okay, so we'll all feel this differently, and I know I started to talk about that. There's a couple main ways that are going to influence that, and this is something that I think what I'll want to do. Pluto is in your 11th house, Sally. Sagittarius on your 7th house. Yes, Dita, right, because you have Gemini rising, right, sidereally, just like I do. So in your 11th house, that's going to That's going to involve social organizations, groups that you might belong to, clubs, humanitarian organizations, any kind of large group that you're a part of. If you work for a corporation, it could govern the people, you as members of the corporation. So you could see that play out socially, but you could also see that play out in terms of your hopes and dreams. I was talking about this during our new moon intention setting about how the 11th house is my favorite house because it governs hopes and dreams, right? And I have this big dream about, making a career for myself as an artist, right? So you could intentionally choose to use the reflective and transformative energy that's going to be playing out. You could use that intentionally towards manifesting your hopes and dreams during this time. And so that's one thing that I love about astrology is if you know when these transits are going to happen and you know what kinds of effects they have, you can anticipate them and you can choose to use them with intention to kind of support what you're wanting to accomplish in your life. My favorite thing about astrology, I guess, is what you could say there. So as far as like to what degree we'll feel this, there's a couple of places that you can go to for clues. And this is where it's very helpful if you have a copy of your natal chart. I have a video for how you can get a copy if you don't have a copy. I also have a chart calculator on my website. It doesn't give you a PDF, but you can grab a screenshot of it. But I'll drop that link for getting your own natal chart in the comments in case anyone needs it. So you have natal Pluto in your 3rd, and so that's communication, early childhood education, travel, siblings and neighbors. So kind of close relationships. In that sense, like within what would be considered kind of peer groups, I guess you could say. Committed to memory, absolutely, right? So if you're looking at how much this could impact you, trying to gauge like if you might feel a Pluto retrograde quite a bit or not very much. So there's a couple places you can go to get some information to kind of gauge this for yourself. So if you're looking at your own natal chart, you can look at where is Pluto by house to know what area of life a Pluto transit or Pluto retrograde could be affecting you, right? Like I was talking about how I have it in Virgo in the 4th house. So for me, that would potentially be home and family. By sign, you want to look at is he strongly placed by sign, which would have to do with is he in exaltation or fall, is he in detriment, or is he in his rulership? And you can check those placements if you have the quick reference guide that I made. I do have a little chart, I think maybe on the back page, on page 2, I think, that'll talk about the planetary powers. And so you can look by sign and see whether a planet is exalted or in fall. And so you can look at what sign Pluto is in your natal chart and look at if he's strong or weak by planetary power in that sense. That's one of the first things you can look at. You can look at what's his relative strength by aspect to other planets in your chart. Does he aspect personal planets, right? And the personal planets are Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the 5 closest to the Earth. Then if he's touching a personal planet, that can be significant for you because he will play out in your life in relationship to, that personal planet that he's aspecting. And you can get a sense of how that might play out for you by, is it a tense aspect? Is it an easy aspect? Is it going to be something that's likely to be challenging for you where you can learn lessons and have real growth opportunities? Or does he manifest in a way that just kind of comes naturally to you, just like second nature? So you can get a sense by looking at what type of aspect. And then you can also take a look at, this is kind of like an extra piece of the puzzle. Natal Pluto is in Libra, retrograde, 10th or 11th house, depending on the system. My natal Pluto is retrograde too, Petite. That is really kind of interesting. I'm trying to think. Mine is retrograde in Virgo, though. How do you feel? Like, have you ever got a sense of how that plays out for you? Like, given that Pluto represents authority, influence, wealth, those sorts of things, but also transformation, death. What I found in my experience, the way Pluto has played out in the 4th house, Fourth house can also represent the stronger parent. So in my chart, the fourth house would represent my father. And my father was really kind of an authoritarian kind of figure, right? Like, you did not argue with him. You just, did what he said and just kind of like stayed out of the line of fire pretty much. Love my dad very much. Like, not a negative relationship at all, but that was just that was our family dynamic. My dad was in charge. He was the boss. That was just how it was. The way I've seen the Pluto play out in Virgo for me is that, because Virgo is representative of health energy, right? I have just incredible like regenerative ability health-wise. Like, I have crazy more stamina than most other people that I know when it comes to like doing hard physical labor. Like, I can outwork like most people. I usually keep going after everyone else is long quit. So those are kind of how I've noticed it feel out. If you have him in Libra, you're going to feel that play out more in terms of like probably relationships, where you might see like power struggles, or you may find that you have lots of influence in relationships, or your partner may be overly influential. So that could be how you'd see it play out. And then, of course, it would play out differently in 10th or 11th house, too. Like, you'd see that play out in your social circles, potentially. Like, maybe you're a person of influence amongst your friends. So that's another way. Pluto in Virgo, Pluto in Libra. Yeah, Amy, we were just talking about that, about how that could play out, like, in your relationships. And then also you want to look at what house it's in, because that Pluto is going to play out in that particular house for you as well. And Pluto and Virgo. So Sally, you have, as I have, I wonder if we're maybe around like the same age, like in that same generation that would have Pluto and Virgo. But I don't know. I'm curious if that's what you've found, that you have stamina beyond what other people Amy, you have it in the 5th house. That's interesting. So 5th house, that's creativity. That's romance and love. That's also children. And so you could potentially, so one way that I've seen that play out, 1975. Perfect, Sally. Yes, I was born in 1975 too. How totally funny. So Amy, 5th house, sometimes what we see there is if you have children, or if you're planning on having children, you might find that one of your children grows up to be a very influential type of person. Or one of your children grows up to take on a position of power. So you could see it play out in that way, but you could also see it play out in creativity. You could see it play out in your romantic relationships as well. But that kind of gives you an idea. So there's these areas that you can look at in your chart. You want to look at house, you want to look at sign, you want to look at what aspects he makes to other planets. Are they personal planets? If he's not making aspects to personal planets, if he's making aspects to other outer planets like Uranus and Neptune, you might not feel Pluto's presence as personally and directly in your life as other folks might in that case. And so that's to give you an idea of how we approach him differently than the personal planets in terms of interpretation. So you'll feel it if he's touching a personal planet, if he's ruler of your sun, ruler of your ascendant, or ruler of your chart. If you don't have that close of relationship with Pluto in your chart, then you may not feel it as strongly, but you can still consciously use the energy. So Dita says, my husband has Pluto in Virgo, has huge stamina, but I always attribute it to his sun, Mars, Saturn conjunction. That's really interesting. I always attribute it to my sun in Capricorn, and I have Saturn really closely conjunct to my ascendant, and Saturn is a persistent, or not Saturn, but Capricorn. Capricorn is a very persistent, determined kind of energy, and so I just chalked it up to that. But no, actually, it took me a while to kind of figure out Pluto transiting the midheaven is always a bad thing. No, so the midheaven, this is interesting. The midheaven points to, there's two ways to look at it. There's two things that it can indicate. The midheaven points to your career. It points to your highest achievement in life. Right? The pinnacle of achievement that you could possibly achieve, your highest potential. Like, you might not achieve that if you don't, make effort and initiate, things in this lifetime, because you have a choice about how that plays out. But if you're making a conscious effort to achieve in your life, the midheaven points to your highest potential for achievement. Anytime you have a planet that's within, I would say, even a 10-degree orb of the midheaven, they're going to play into that midheaven experience and color it. And so what that means for you, Jonna, is that Pluto on the midheaven is a time when you could be seen or could achieve a great deal of personal influence and authority, if that makes sense. So that potential is there. It's a matter of, are you cultivating it, and are you going to use that transit while it's happening? Because you can always choose not to use the transit. Oh, it's your husband, not you, but you just looked at his chart. It was scary. No, don't be scared. Don't be scared. I like Pluto. I actually painted a painting of Pluto. I like Pluto's energy because it's death, rebirth, transformation. It represents a second chance. It represents a fresh start, a new beginning. Yeah, you have to go through the crucible to get there, but all transformation that's worth anything coming out the other end of it is probably going to be, painful and kind of, maybe even a little excruciating going through. But that just means that he has the potential to, if that's in his natal chart, he has the potential to be a person of great influence and authority. If it's a transit he's undergoing, then it's a time when he could cultivate influence and authority. But that's really kind of cool. I like that you're checking his chart too. Like, I like to look at everyone's charts. I know, like, what's going on for so-and-so? So what's awesome about Pluto retrograde is that it's a transit of inner transformation, right? Because if Pluto represents regeneration, transformation, and metamorphosis in general, when he's retrograde, that's an opportunity for us to transform ourselves. And that's how I like to use it. So in this sense, in Sagittarius, this could be a transformation of philosophical beliefs, right? Because that's one thing that Sagittarius represents. It could be a transformation of ideals, because Sagittarius is very much about idealism. It could be a transformation of religious beliefs. It could be a transformation of... gosh, I don't remember where I was going with that. Philosophical beliefs, your ideals. Oh, yeah, and your religious beliefs. Let me make sure I'm not losing track of where I'm at with my notes, because I took my papers out of the holder and now I'm getting them shuffled. So what you want to do is you want to get a copy of your chart. And I know a lot of people in the group already have one, because we've been talking about where you can go to get one. Plus I have the chart drawing tool on the website. But get a copy of your chart and get a copy of the quick reference guide, because then you can look up... by sign using your natal chart and see what house that would be in for you and what the house represents. So it'll be sitting on your sun for a long time, and that's because it's a slow moving planet. And so that could indicate for you, Dita, that could be an increase in your own personal authority and influence, or an increase in your own personal wealth, or it could be that you have dealings or a meeting with someone who is highly influential. So the sun can represent you, but it can also represent a man, or it can represent, or Pluto can represent your personal authority and power and influence, but it can also represent as another person outside of you who has great influence and authority. So watch that and kind of see, like, you might have a sense anyway, like, now that you understand what the two planets can represent in a chart, you might already know what that means for you. So get a copy of your chart, get a copy of the Quick Start Reference Guide, identify what house Sagittarius occupies. If you have Aries rising right now, that's going to be your 9th house. If you have Taurus rising, that's going to be your 8th house. If you have Gemini rising like I do, he's transiting your 7th house. If you have Cancer rising, 6th house, Leo rising, this is 5th house. I think we talked about that already. Virgo rising, this is going to be in your 4th house. If you have Libra rising, 3rd house, we talked about that. Scorpio, if you have Scorpio rising, this is 2nd house, which is cool because that's also wealth. So, of course, Pluto is going to feel right at home there. So you might be reevaluating what's important to you wealth-wise. You might even be trying to decide, you know, for those of you who are Scorpio rising, like you might even be trying to decide how much is enough wealth for me, right? Sagittarius rising, this is first house. Capricorn, 12th house, so in a very private part of your life. If you're Aquarius rising, this is your 11th house, and then Pisces rising, this is going to be 10th house. So career, which is kind of interesting. I always like to see Pluto influencing a career house. It's kind of fascinating to see. So you want to identify, like I said, what that house corresponds to, which we kind of just went over. You want to look at, in your own chart, is he a ruler, ruler of the ascendant, or ruler of the sun? Is he making multiple, few, or no aspects to personal planets? We went over that. And are they supportive or challenging aspects, or are they a mix? Sometimes they're a mix. And usually when they're a mix, it doesn't mean that they cancel each other out. It usually means that you're going to feel both, the supportive and the challenging aspects. So all that information is going to help give you some clues as to how the coming 5-month retrograde could affect you, like how strongly and in what area of your life. So the final piece that you want to look at is the degree of his station. So this is particular to retrograde planets. When they begin retrograde and when they end retrograde, there's a brief period of time where the planet, from our perspective here on Earth, looks as though it's stationary in the sky before it starts going backwards, right? And so the day that the planet is stationary, it is particularly powerful and particularly unpredictable. And so that's why we will tell you to watch the days around the planetary stations, because they can give you, first of all, you want to keep it out because something could happen, but also because it could give you a clue as to what the flavor of that retrograde is going to be about for you. But what you want to look at in this case is the degree of the beginning of the retrograde and the degree of the end of the retrograde. And you want to look and see if you have any planets or personal points at those degrees in your chart. Because if he stations on a planet or personal point as he begins or ends his retrograde, you will feel it, and you'll feel it a lot more strongly than other people might. And okay, so that's the final point that you want to look at. And so in terms of the current Pluto retrograde, expect to be tired. Like I was saying, take care of yourself. He slows down the body's regenerative ability, and you want to remember that. Be cognizant of that. Don't overwork yourself. Don't overtax your body physically. And if you are already dealing with some sort of health issue, just double down on the self-care and the healthy approaches. It's a good time for reflection. It's a good time for recuperation. It's a good time for rest. And then it's also a good time for transformation. So I want to talk about this rest part. Part of the Pluto mythology is that he's the god of the underworld, right? And he is the lord basically over winter, right? I don't know if you recall the story of Pluto and the Pluto, I'm trying to think, is it Persephone? Pluto-Persephone love story, right? And Ceres, her mother, was not happy when he kidnapped. Is it a good time for developing psychic abilities? Yes, absolutely, because that's an 8th house occult thing. Turned inward, absolutely, yes, it would be a good time for that. Persephone, okay, that's what I thought. So he kidnaps her, right? And Ceres gets all sorts of upset and vows that spring will not return to the land until her daughters return to her, right? And so what happens then? It's winter forever. Prosper Pine is another way of saying her name, yep. And so the 4 degrees Virgo, that planet is my empty third house. You aren't kidding about exhaustion. I am not surprised, Jonna. So be sure, take care of yourself, take care of your health. Take care of your health. So the way they settled this is that he agreed to return her daughter to her for 6 months of the year, right? And so we have 6 months of winter, and then we have 6 months of summer. And so what is winter? That, yes, it goes with Hades too. That winter, that's a time for rest. It's a time for not actively growing, right? It's a time for a resting and a sleeping of energy. And so it's kind of funny that this happens as we go like into summer break, especially where Pluto is transiting Sagittarius, which is a house of education, higher education, right? So this is a time for rest from higher education and higher mental faculties. So like don't think too hard even, right, over this planet, because she'd eaten, yes, because pomegranate is a fruit of the underworld, right? And anyone who ate of the fruit of the underworld could not return to life. And so he fed her 6 seeds, and that was a seed for each month that she had to spend with him every year. And then 6 months that she was returned to the world of the living. It's a very fascinating story. It's also a very fascinating story of obsession and love, or lust, which is not really love, but obsession and power struggles in love relationships. Plutonic relationships are kind of an interesting study in that sense in astrology, because they're very rarely about love and very often about power and control. So, as I was saying, yes, rest. And use it for transformation. So if there's a part of your life that you wanted to transform in some way, if you have an obsession that you are ready to release and let go of and move past, if you have, whether that's an obsession to an ideology or a philosophy, anything that's not serving you any longer, this is a perfect opportunity to transform that into something new, and something new that is supportive of you, right? That's not holding you back. Oh, yes, I understand. We're just about wrapping up, sweetie. I think you caught all the most important parts of it anyway, hon. Get some sleep, and I will see you next time, I'm sure, today. Have a good one. But yeah, that's what you want to use the next 5 months for, really, over the summer and into the fall through the end of September. Identify where in your life this is happening, because that area of your life is a prime candidate for transformation or for release of obsession, or whether it's, like I said, with an ideology or philosophy or a religious belief, anything there that you want to transform, you can do that. If you want to transform your relationships with foreign places, foreign people, foreign cultures, it's also an excellent time to do that too. Or if you're, if you publish or broadcast, and the work that you do in that area, if it's ready for a transformation, whether through subject matter or transforming into a new way of expressing or sharing your message with the world, those are all good things to pursue as we go through the summer and the early fall months. Well, I guess summer for us here in the northern hemisphere. I know some of you guys are in the southern hemisphere, so it will be it will be winter for you. But thanks everyone for joining me. Does anyone have any questions about the material that we covered? I had another note that I did want to share with you for those of you who are curious. So December 30th, 2005, if that's not too far to think back, that is when Pluto first entered sidereal Sagittarius. He did retrograde back out into Scorpio briefly, and then re-entered Sagittarius for good on at the end of after the retrograde was over in October of 2006. So not quite a year later. But if you can think back to December of 2005, what transformational themes might have been activated in your life when he first entered Sagittarius, if something underwent a dramatic change. I know for me, my family, my husband and I moved our children from Idaho to Arizona. Excuse me. And so that was a huge transformational shift in our lives. But if you can think back to that, so that could inform how you might experience this, if you can identify an experience around that time frame, December 2005, that might have been a significant transformation for you. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the inbox. I am going to pop off, and I will share the link for how you can go get a copy of your sidereal natal chart from astro.com. Dita says she's working with her husband doing new music that was a radical change in his work. Yes, and that would be the a creative way that it might be expressing for him in his chart, and for you, you're feeling that through your relationships. Thank you, Sally. Thanks for joining me. I'm glad to have you guys on. It was kind of fun. Like, I wasn't expecting to do this talk, but I'm glad that I had the chance to do it. And I've actually made a list of some other like sign ingresses, some eclipses, things like that are coming up at the through the remainder of the year. So if you guys have any suggestions or have any requests for topics for me to do a live stream on or write a blog post on, let me know in the group, because I'm happy to do like special topics if you have special topics. So 25 was the name of the project used. Radical. I'm trying to think in December of 2005 what else significant was going on. Interesting that you named the project Radical. I'm curious to see like if Uranus or Aquarian energy was playing into that during that time frame. But I don't have, I usually like, I look really quick on my phone. Of course, I'm live streaming from my phone. I have a really awesome phone app that I love. I can pull up charts super quick on it. It's quicker than my software on my computer. And then the last piece that I want to let you know is that he's going to be in Sagittarius until he moves into Capricorn, in January 2021. So we'll make it through all of 2020 before he changes sign. But January 26, 2021, that's going to be the other date to watch, because whatever transformation was activated for you when he moved into Sagittarius in December 2005, that transformation will be complete by the time he leaves on the 26th of January 2021. So that's kind of like what you want to be investigating if you're kind of curious of how this is taking place and transpiring for yourself in your own chart. But thanks everyone for joining me. I'll let you go. I'm going to hop off because my husband is starting his live stream and I don't want to hog all the bandwidth. But thanks. Oh, address the conjunction with Saturn. Yes, that's one thing that I do want to talk about. I talked a little bit about Saturn entering Sagittarius on the blog. And the Saturn transit is going to be through 2020 as well, if I recall correctly. But that's definitely a hot topic in the astrological world at any rate. There's a lot of astrologers that are spending time studying that aspect, but because it's going to be an important one. It's one that describes a 20-year trend. Oh, and that will be particularly important for you, Dita. Wow, you're really going to feel that one. I am curious how that will play out for you, and I know that's like in the future considerably. But when that comes, like once you've kind of identified like what is this signifying for me, if you will share that, that's exactly the kind of feedback that I love to get from you guys, is how these things are playing out for you in your own chart. Prison, I hope not. I hope not. Although there's lots of kinds of prisons, aren't there? There's lots of kinds of prisons. Lots of kinds of prisons. Yeah, we don't want you to be in prison. Hopefully you won't be in prison. I hope there's not any risk that you would be in prison. Although Saturn is kind of notorious for signaling that in some cases. But thanks everyone. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, like I said, I will touch on the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020, Dita. And if anything else comes to mind, holler at me. And I will, I'll see what I can put together to kind of give you guys a heads up of what to expect. And thanks for joining me. And watch for the link for where to get your natal chart as a PDF if you need to get that, because I'm going to pop that in the comments just as soon as I post this video. But thanks for watching.